Hi, I've been asked if I'd like to share something on verse 3 of Psalm 80, which says, "Restore us, O God, make your face shine on us, that we may be saved." And as I was reading this verse and thinking about what it might mean for me, or if I had anything at all I could share, I felt myself being really drawn to this notion of the face of God, what it actually means and could mean in this verse. And it could be because I studied art history at university and I'm really interested in portraiture and what it can capture and represent about a person. And I've seen loads of different depictions of God's face in different artworks over the years. But as I'm pretty sure none of the artists had actually seen God's actual face, they would have based their portraits on people familiar to them from everyday life that they'd seen or knew. And what's interesting here is one of the first things that popped into my mind when thinking about sharing on this verse was the picture on a blank piece of paper representing us, with an artist holding a printing block also carved in the image of a face, and this face represents the face of God. And they were actually trying to see if they could align and match up the outline of these two faces in the process of printing the work. But the faces weren't lining up properly at all, and that's because essentially they were two different faces. And with this impression, I just felt like God was really emphasising to me this tension that exists for us, that try as we might, we don't get to create God in our own image. God doesn't have to line up with us. He is the master copy. And it's so often the case that we get so caught up in the swirl of our own thoughts, emotions, and our own perspective that we automatically assume that God thinks and feels like we do, or we lose sight of God completely. There's this quote often attributed to the writer Anne Lamott which says, "You can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do." And for me, this gets right to the heart of this truth and points to where it's most damaging for us to automatically assume that God's in agreement with us, because it creates such a massive blind spot in us, and we end up representing God to others and even to ourselves in ways that don't reflect Him at all. God Himself in Isaiah says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." God's ways and thoughts are always so much higher than ours because God loves and places exactly the same value on everybody, not just those we like. So for me anyway, I think that one way God responds to the cry of this verse to restore and save us by shining His face on us is by inviting us to seek His face and get to know what He really looks like for ourselves, who He really is and His heart. And then we'll be in a position to recognise when we're totally out of alignment with Him. And it'll be really obvious to us, like in the portraits of God from art history, when someone has stuck a different face on God, one that doesn't really belong to Him. And I think the more time we spend getting to know God for ourselves, the more we'll begin to look like Him as He begins the process of restoring us. So our heart towards others looks more like Him. So I suppose my prayer, thinking about all of this, is that I would have eyes to see the face of God more clearly.